This morning's Hebrew Bible reading comes from Esther, chapter 4, verses 1 through 14. Please listen for a word from God. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maid and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hatach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. Hatach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king and make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. Hatach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatach and gave him a message for Mordecai, saying, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in this king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this." Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Closer to me? Sweet. So, for the next 3 weeks, we'll be doing a sermon series on some of the unlikely heroes of the Bible. Our aim for this series is to show in some new ways how even in the most unlikely circumstances, believers have shown great courage, bravery, and wisdom in the face of some situations that would scare most of us half to death. We will begin with the story of Esther. And Esther's story is certainly an interesting one. It has all the makings for a great fairy tale. We start with a young and beautiful hero, a scheming villain, a wise older parental figure, and an inept and unqualified ruler. In this story, good triumphs over evil, and everyone lives happily ever after. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly lighthearted tale, the book of Esther dives into some darker themes: racism, threat of genocide, and pride and vanity. And I don't know about you, but I almost always tune out of a sermon that starts with something like, "The world is so bad today," or "What an awful time to be alive," or "Things used to be so much better than they are now." So I will not be starting mine out like that. I will say, what a great world we live in today. I can't believe we are so lucky and everything is great for everyone. And because of this, when we look at the world today, obviously we can't fathom the idea of a woman like Esther who is only appreciated for her looks. And we can hardly comprehend an inept and unqualified ruler who seems to go along with the agenda of others behind the scenes without questioning the negative effects that may result from these decisions. And certainly it would be difficult to consider a place where racism and genocide are possible, but I'd like for you to try your best to imagine a world that looks like this. Do you have it? Esther's attitude initially seems a lot like some of ours might be if we were asked to do something like this. Someone comes and asks me for help and I say no, and it's not because I'm fearful for my own life or think that I'm in any danger, but more likely because I just don't want to do it. I'd rather be doing something else. I'll say that I've already made plans or that it's college football Saturday and I can't miss that again. And you know, I just got a dog last month and I can't tell you how many times I've already used him as an excuse to get out of doing something. It's only been a month. I've got to work on my willingness to help people because I've been put in a position to help for a reason, right? And I remember not too long ago, I hosted patio time a few months back, and I picked the TED Talk for the group to watch and wrote out all the discussion questions, and I'm reminded of one of the questions I asked, which was, how conscious are you of the decisions you've made that have led you to where you are now? And I think there were some good responses and a lot about retirement, but that really wasn't what I was looking for, because at 26, I can't imagine the idea of retirement. But since then, I've pondered the decisions that led me to be right here today. I graduated from college with a degree in anthropology, and if you could believe it, no one wanted to give an anthropologist a job. So I moved back to Texas for a year and worked as a valet and felt like I wasn't doing anything that benefited other people. Just going to work every day and then going home, and figured I needed a change. So that year I applied to MTS and moved here, and then 2 years had passed, and after a couple of youth jobs never came to fruition, I thought I'd give up on doing youth ministry. I mean, who wants a washed-up 25-year-old youth minister anyways? It was way too old. But as luck would have it, I traveled to Scotland, of all places, to meet Rob and Mimi, and learned all about St. John's and everything this church stands for, and was eventually offered this position. And after a whole year has gone by, I'm finally up here preaching and have gone through 3 wardrobe changes this morning. And all for what? I think for such a time as this. So maybe, just maybe, Esther was put into her position for such a time as she was, for a particular reason, because she was in a position to help and fight the injustice of her time. Now, I need you all to know that half of what I've said already wouldn't be allowed in my home church. I need you all to know that St. John's is really weird for me. I grew up in a very conservative church, in a relatively conservative denomination, and if anyone ever mentioned something about LGBTQ, they were more than likely condemning it. So it may come as no surprise to you that I don't always know what to do when big things come up around here. And I frequently ask myself what I'm doing here. I'm like a deer in the headlights. I ask God why God thought this was a good fit for me. Perhaps even more ridiculous is that Johnny and Mimi thought it was a good fit for me. I went to my first Pride Parade, which I never thought would have been a church event. I helped lead a course for the youth on sex and healthy relationships, which I wouldn't have ever considered being church-related. And I would ask myself, why are you here? What are you doing here? Am I here for such a time as this? And I think back to the day in February where so many hearts were broken, when the United Methodist Church upheld its views on homosexual marriage and LGBTQ clergy. So many of us came in the following Sunday morning with our heads down, feeling hopeless, wondering what we were all doing here. I heard things like, if we can't do this or practice our beliefs the way we want, then why are we here? And I wonder if we were not here specifically for such a time as that. If we were not there in order to provide a face for the movement, to provide a shelter for people in a storm, to show courage even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And while I understand that big events like that are kind of rare, I also know that there are no shortages of crises. Whether it's homelessness or poverty, whether it's gun violence or a lack of access to education, whether it's natural disaster relief or hunger and a need for something as simple as diapers, this church has stepped up and been visible. God has put us here, each and every one of us, right here, for such a time as this. Esther is one of only 2 books of the Bible that does not mention God. And I think that's really interesting, that a book of the Bible would not mention God. God, after all, is kind of a big deal for the Bible. But I also find that comforting, that even when things seem awful and we can't necessarily see or hear God, or might not even mention God in our lives, God is still working, and God has put us in a place for such a time as this. So I'm going to finish with this here. I encourage you, whenever you are faced with something big or small, and you have the opportunity to create positive change in the world, be courageous like Esther, without regard for yourself. And maybe that's what loving your neighbor really looks like. Go and be courageous, knowing that God has put you right where you are for such a time as this. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.